What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Cheeky Midweeky, where we are making strength and conditioning not boring anymore. And you know how we're doing that. We are highlighting practitioners that work in the field, whether it's strength coaches. And today we have a mental skills performance coach. Theresa, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Excited to have a conversation with you.
Like I said, I've been looking forward to this since, like I said, it was COVID, right? So it was
hmm
2020 where you were with Tucker, and that conversation stuck out with me simply because of, I think you said something along the lines of mental performance is not envisioning something the night before a game. Like, it's actually periodized and you can plan and have ebbs and flows. And that just struck me to the core. Like, first of all, bravo for saying that. But second of all, like, what what should it look like for us strength coaches that want to do this right and collaborate with experts like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and it excites me that other sports performance professionals in the field want to have this type of training or knowledge, right? Because we all support high performing athletes, and
Mhm.
it's not just a strength coach. It's not just a, on the field coach, a sport coach. It's not just a mental performance coach. It's not just a nutritionist. It's all of us working together to get the most elite type of training and skill set and program for that athlete or for that team. And I think that's where the periodization comes into place, right? So like you said, like mental performance training is not like I do something once, I do imagery once, and it
Yes.
just happens to work. I have a reset routine and I do it once and it works all the time. We need to train these skills just like we need to train our mental skills just like we train our physical skills. And that takes reps every day. It takes trial and error. It takes failure. And so, with that conversation with periodization, it it kind of marriages nicely with the strength and conditioning field with how your type of programs periodize, right, with the balance of volume and intensity. And
Hmm.
same thing with mental skills, right? In the off season, we want to have an increase in our volume and intensity, but in a competitive season, that intensity needs to come down, right? So we want to train and educate in the off season so then they acquire the skills needed to execute in competition season. And I think that's more a simple way of putting it, right? Like we want to educate in the off season and start acquiring these skills and practicing them. So then when competition season happens, it's a no brainer. It's an automatic thought. We're not thinking about it. We're just executing.
I couldn't have said that any better. And I want to caveat this right now, everybody. When we were talking off air, she works with like, you coach lacrosse. Like, so you coach sports too. So it's not like she's just, I feel like so many strength coaches or other performance coaches might be like, oh, they're just off doing nothing. And then it's like, no, she's literally working with athletes day to day, teaching them how to do their sport.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely an interesting balance with wearing a coach hat and a mental performance hat, right? So I actually reach out to my other colleagues and friends in the mental performance field to do some of that work for me because it's necessary, right? Like I tell coaches all the time, you tell the athletes sometimes the same thing I tell them, but I just say it in a different way,
Yeah.
right? And
Amen
so
to
they're
that. Ain't that
listening
yeah.
to, right? It doesn't always have to be the mental performance coach that gives the message. It doesn't always have to be the strength coach that gives the message. It's kind of who the athlete connects with and what language or what speaks to them are they connecting with. So it's a little bit of balancing the science behind what we do and also the art. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be you. We talk a lot recently, like with some of my friends, like drop your ego, right? It's not about you. It's about getting the athlete what they need.
Amen to that. And how would you say strength coaches can do this right with their athletes, working with them, speed, off season, weight room? Like, what's some of the best practices for strength coaches out there
Yeah,
to
that's
do right without crossing into your right? Like, there's
sure,
the
sure.
joke is stay in your lane, but it's like, how do we stay in our lane, but like make sure we're respecting other people or playing in the sandbox well?
Right. It's like we want to stay in our lane because we all have our expertise in training, right?
Yes.
Yet we still can collaborate
Correct.
And actually, a colleague and mine are actually doing a lot of research in this more recently with talking about creating programs and curriculum for strength and conditioning coaches to help them execute these skills in the weight room. And so I think specifically, like you guys sometimes have meet the athletes, work with the athletes before coaches even do, or
Yeah.
even have more touch points than coaches, right? So the first thing is creating that relationship and developing that rapport. And before any skills start to get taught, it's about the relationship and rapport. Because if you don't have a relationship with an athlete, they are not going to listen to you. It's like, that's just, I think that is maybe different, or maybe some young professionals just want to get in and teach and here are the skills, and I see that you're struggling with performance
That's me. That's
anxiety,
why
and
I'm
take a
laughing.
deep breath, right?
That's me. Like, I want to help
And
you. I want to help you.
yes, and that's so great, and we get so excited about the work that we do, and that's awesome. And though we also, I think the art behind it is taking a step back and observing and learning first, asking questions, and then and building that relationship. And then we have, okay, these are, let's just say, the 8 foundational mental skills. Maybe 4 of them are really specific for how we work in the weight room that translate onto the field, right? And that's where we start the education process. So I think that's where we start, and then we can build on what we call brief interventions of introducing quick techniques to help with, whatever maybe the lesson is that day in the weight room, or the focus in the weight room, something along those lines.
Now, one of the things I wrote down when you were talking right there is, what if strength coaches are undoing, and anybody that's listening and not watching this, I put it in air quotes, undoing sessions with a mental therapist coach or whatever the proper vernacular is, because if we're just berating athletes or doing things that quote unquote go against things that they've learned or whatever, how can strength coaches be more aware of the words that they use and the actions that they have with their athletes, but still respecting the fact that, like, we have to push them and have them do difficult things, wake up early in the morning, late at night, blah, 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 and sprint, lift heavy. Like, how do we handle that dichotomy well?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a challenge, especially when your training and motivation style may be different from the athlete's training and motivation style and the
Sure.
team's. And so I think first it's recognizing that what motivates an entire team might be different than what motivates a specific individual, right? And so something that's really simple is like the music that you play in the weight room, right? You might like this like heavy metal or rap or whatever it is, and 75% of the team might enjoy that, right? Versus there might be that handful of athletes that's like, can we put on some country? Right? So you have these very different athletes that get them motivated. So, that's kind of a silly example. We all like listen to music, especially those 5 a.m., 6 a.m. workups. We need some external motivators to get us going. So it's recognizing the team needs and also balancing that with an individual need.
Free courses from Strength Coach Network. Right now, we're giving away $1,900 worth of education when you simply sign up for our free giveaway. This lasts until the end of May 2024, where first prize gets access to Fundamentals 1 and 2, which is $1,200 in value and 4.0 CEUs to the NSCA. Second prize is Fundamentals 1 or Fundamentals 2, whichever you do not have, valued at $600 and has 2.0 CEUs. Third place is a $100 store credit to our partners at Ultimate Athlete Concepts, which is the #1 bookstore for athletic coaches textbooks. Simply click down below for more information on how to enter. Anybody can enter. We will announce winners on June 1st. That's fair. That's fair. How do you handle then discipline equal? Like, okay, so I heard you again say that, and big a lot of strength coaches, myself included, Jocko Willing, talking, all right, discipline over motivation. You don't need to
Uh-huh.
have motivation. You just need to rely on discipline. How does that fit into any of this?
Yeah, I think it fits into all of it, right? Like discipline is stronger than motivation. Like when motivation's not there, that's when discipline kicks in,
Yeah.
right? It's building the habits that you do every day when you don't want to do the hard thing, right? Or when you don't want to do the thing. Well, this is the habit that I've created. And, I think, kind of combining with your last question of, how do we use language and not do damage too, it's also like setting the precedent of when you walk into that, like, why are we here, right? What's your purpose? Which then also that leads to what's your goal of the day, right? What are we doing well? What do I need to do better and how? Right. And that how piece is the action, right? What's a specific technique or skill set or focus that I need to have today to accomplish my goal for the day? And when motivation's not there, when we're fatigued, when we're tired, that why and that purpose is our biggest driver. And that's where I see discipline take over, is I'm remembering why I do this in the first place. So I'm going to get my butt up out of bed and get to the weight room at 6 a.m.
How do you then take that message and progress it, regress it with athletes if you're working with different age groups, different sports? How do you individualize that message? Because you talked about, periodization, which strength coaches can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
How about, progressions and regressions? Because for like, all right, strength coaches listening, all right, a reverse lunge is, call it your baseline. If you needed to regress it, you could do a step up. If you needed to make it harder, you could do it rear foot elevated. So how can you progress and regress things to still get that message across based on the mental performance, the training with whatever the athlete is?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because in the field of mental performance, we don't really have any tangible or quantitative, measures, right? Because I mean, we can when we give self-evaluations and reflections, right? We're relying all subjectively on what that athlete feels, says, does, and performs, right? And so, a big motto of mine is own your mindset, own your results.
Mm,
And you're only observing an athlete's behavior, right? It's observable traits. That's how you're measuring more so their mental game, right? So, back to the question of, are they motivated, or what's your why, or what's your purpose? Training journals are huge. Like, every athlete that I work with, or every team, I suggest and highly encourage them to have a training journal.
like a
So,
lifting journal or
well, I'm
reflecting?
sure, I mean, I know Tucker and some of the strength coaches I work, they all have a sheet, right? Like, they know their progress,
Now,
right?
I have a team builder hat on, and we're sponsored by Team Builder. So I'm going to take this second to say we have a journal from Team Builder, because all you got to do is you can look back and see everything that they've done, the progress right there. So strength coaches, if you're still printing off lift cards, get on Team Builder. I don't know what you're doing, but yes, you can track all of the progress that athletes are making through Team Builder, right? And you have that journal. But are you saying like you should also write stuff down? Because I remember somebody telling me that, and I used to hand journal, or I'd type it, because I'd be like, hey, these are my reflections on how the lift went for the day.
Yes. So just like you have a training journal for your physical skills, I encourage athletes to have a training journal for their mental skills.
Got it.
Because then they can go, well, not only like when we, like, so much research out there, like when we write things down, it sticks better, right? You're reinstilling that learning feedback loop, right? I think it, I read it, and then I relearn it, right? So we're strengthening that learning loop, and our memory when we write things down. Second, with that, you can go back and see, where am I being challenged, or where have I plateaued? Where can I adapt? And one of the strongest evaluation systems that I teach athletes, it's an objective evaluation. So after every performance, whether that's every day, every practice, or every competition, it's, what did I do well? What do I need to do better? And how am I going to do that? Right? So we always want to recognize the good. We always want to celebrate what we did well, even if it's something as little as, I made it to the 6 a.m. lift today, right? Like, I was so, right? Like, that is an accomplishment. We always want to recognize the good, hunt the good stuff. But then it's about, okay, how do I keep it objective and task oriented? Is, what do I need to do better? Is that part of my skill? Do I need to start lifting heavier, right? Like I've plateaued, I'm not getting stronger. Do I need to focus better? Do I need to adjust the way my sleep hygiene or how I'm fueling my body? Okay, and how am I going to do that? And now I create a plan, and our confidence and is all based on our preparation, right? When I'm prepared to do something, I free up my focus to put the energy on the thing that I need to do in the moment.
Ain't that the truth? Like when you're trying to multitask or do all these other things, and it's like, okay, do your training session, then reflect on it. But what if anybody's like, hey, in season, I'm going from lift to practice or to meetings to practice? Like, they're like, okay, now you just told me to do one more thing and I got all these other things to do. Like, how do you handle that? What would you maybe
Mm-hmm.
just journal everything at the end of the day and include how lifting and training went? Is that the way to go about it?
Well, I think it's giving yourself one, the grace that you you need to work something else into the schedule, and it's okay if it's not a half hour of journaling, right? Like I think sometimes, like even sometimes athletes are like, I don't journal. What's journaling? I'm like, okay, let's like get the negative connotation out of the word journaling, right? It's reflection, it's
You want me to think about my
evaluation,
feelings? What is wrong
right?
with you?
And so maybe that is adding to your morning routine or your nightly routine. The minute I wake up in the morning, when I have my coffee or I'm eating my breakfast, I take an additional 5 minutes, right? I'm habit stacking. If anyone's read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks all about habit stacking. Like it works, right? The things that you already do, add 3 to 5 minutes of a habit that you want to build, for example, journaling or doing a reflection, and stack that to something you already do. So whether that's part of your breakfast in the morning or before you go to bed, if you like to read, or, this is how I'm going to prepare for the next day. And sometimes when I find that athletes do it before bed, it does get all the thoughts out of their head, or they're thinking about everything that they have to do the next day. It's like, okay, let me actually just plan and write 3 things down. Whew, okay, now I can close my eyes and have a freer mind.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I did a course from the company Sleep Me. They make the chili pad, and part of what they like I learned in that education course was to journal before you go to bed, so that way your mind can be like, oh, word, I've seen you write this down. I don't have to stay awake and try to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
remember these things. And I use that as a way to connect and try to give some athletes some practical advice. And I had it one kid specifically, he was the kicker on the team at my old school. And he was like, coach, that helped me so much. Like just being able to write
Yeah,
down before I went to bed, get the thoughts out of my head, what, even if they're stupid things, like don't forget your lunch tomorrow, or like what, you know what I mean? Like just let your brain be able to be like, okay, cool, I don't have to keep all these little processes going on. So there's some power in that. Everybody that heard it,
totally.
you might just kind of think it's a throwaway comment. It's not. That's power.
It is. And you think about all these high performing athletes, especially at the college level, like you said, they are waking up, getting training in, then they have to go straight to class. They have to get breakfast. They have to go to their actual practice. They have to condition. They have to go study. They have to eat dinner. Then you have to get 8 hours of sleep. What's 8 hours of sleep? Right? So you naturally have all of these thoughts, and they're not even thoughts, but just things to do, right? And things to remember. And so that is where the power of, okay, if it's going to allow me to fall asleep a half hour faster, well, then you just gained a half hour of sleep back,
Mm.
right? And so that's another way to think of it, right? If you're not getting quality sleep, if it's taking you 45 minutes to fall asleep, if your mind is in this hamster wheel of thoughts and everything you have to remember to do tomorrow, we'll take the 5 minutes to write that stuff down before the bed. Or I will say the reminders app in my phone is a lifesaver. Like I set reminders for
Yeah.
myself throughout the day or the next morning to wake up and remember. And then I
Now,
create my to-do list for the next day.
now, do you actually go like? Okay, talk about that. I can't even. I don't take the time to open mine. I'll just press and hold the Siri on the side, and I'll just be like,
Yep.
"Hey, remind me tomorrow at 6 a.m. Blah blah blah." And I have automatic reminders. Like right now, the people at Plunge, they don't sponsor this show, but I mean, you guys should. Anyways, right now on my whatchamacallit, my reminders is change and do my weekly cleaning and maintenance
Uh-huh.
of the so like you can set things, ring alarm. I have that. So like every other Saturday I set it. So again, let your brain let go of certain things that are important by utilizing the technology that's around you to help your life be better. And I mean, I sleep
Yes.
great. I don't know if that's also
That could definitely be helping you sleep better. But I mean, I'm a big proponent of, we got to practice what we preach. Like, I'm not going to tell an athlete or a team to do something that I don't either already do or I've tried before, and it's become part of my process. Right? It might not be all of the skills, but at least I've done it, or it's part of my daily habits. It's part of my way that I train my brain to help me to be the best performer that I can be.
yeah.
And I think that's really important. If we're modeling the skills that we're also teaching athletes to do as well.
Everybody that's been listening with us for the last 20 minutes are like, all right, this she knows a ton of what she's talking about. What's your background? Kind of talk about where you've been and your experiences, and so everybody can get a full picture of where you've been around and your history.
Sure. Yeah. Well, short version. I've dabbled in a lot of different things, but always have been anchored in sports. So, grew up playing lacrosse and soccer, dabbled in a few other sports, but those were my two main. And I went to play college at a Division II school, Westchester University. Had a really awesome career, both as an individual and with the team. And that's really where I fell in love with, or really actually not only fell in love with, I knew I wanted to be in athletics for the rest of my life, but also I started to uncover like the power of your brain. And before I even knew sports psychology and mental performance coaching was a field that I could have a career in, I started reading a book called The Mind Gym by Gary Mack. And it just kind of released this whole other level of my performance for myself that I didn't even know was there. And so that allowed me then to start having conversations with professors of, I want to be, I was going to grad school for counseling. Like I knew I wanted to be in some sort of counseling. And I met with a professor that was like, if you want to be in athletics, start applying to grad programs in sports psychology. And I was like, whoa, that's a field. Like this is awesome. And I'm so glad that's not really the mindset now. Like our field has grown so rapidly, and it's awesome to see that and become such a forefront now that we're growing and we're part of athletic programs, and that's awesome. So I went to grad school at Temple, studied under Dr. Michael Sachs, who is an awesome human being and mentor in the field. And ever since I graduated, I always had my own private practice. I had a business partner for a while, and but I also always was either coaching, had a full-time job. I worked in the healthcare field for a while. I actually worked in the mental health field, healthcare field in a crisis center for a while. And now all of those opportunities had led me to where I am today, where I work in a private high school in athletics. I do mental performance coaching with them. I have my own private practice, TG Performance, and I work with IMG Academy. So it's been quite a ride for the past 10 years since I've been in this field. But I think really playing sports and being immersed there physically has really what's connected me the most to how I work and train with athletes. And I think that's super important. I would say the majority of people in our field have played a sport at a high level, because we've been there, right? We all needed mental performance coaches when we were in high school or in college. And I think that says a lot because we want to do the work. We want to continue to do the work for ourselves, and we want to continue to give back to athletics and to the field of sports psychology.
Amen to that. And leading off of what you just said there, how can you then help athletes, or how do you handle the athletes that are overly amped up and need to calm down versus the athletes that need to get amped up, like respecting a team setting? Like how does that dichotomy work? You need CEUs to remain certified. At Strength Coach Network, both of our long form education courses, Fundamentals 1 and Fundamentals 2, both have 2.0 CEUs to the NSCA in Category C. When you complete the learning and you complete the learning check, you will earn your 2.0 CEUs. That is 33% of the CEUs you need in a 3-year reporting period. Click the link down below to learn more about both courses. If you're looking to train your athletes in person or remote, you need to make sure that you're utilizing Team Builder. I have had Team Builder since 2019 and still utilize it with my remote athletes. This makes everything simple, from the ability to program, have videos right there, wellness questionnaires. Loved being able to have it in person at the rack at Towson, and being able to have it in person now at Goldfinch. This has made my life easier as a coach. If you're still printing on paper, I don't know what you're doing. If you have a different software company, again, I don't know what you're doing. Check out Team Builder down in the link below. Are you or your athletes waking up too hot or too cold in the middle of the night? Or are you looking for a sleep tracker option that doesn't involve wearing a ring or a wrist or a watch, something on your body? Then you need to look no further than the company SleepMe. SleepMe makes chili pads, which keep your bed cold or warm depending on what you want. And they also have a tracker that will go underneath that pad, so it will be able to tell how well you slept. When I did a little study on myself with the Aura Ring and with the SleepMe tracker, they were within 97% of each other, and it was actually pretty astonishing how similar the two were. I love my chili pad. It makes me sleep great. I sleep cold. I actually wake up cold now. I haven't woke up warm. And pretty much ever since I've had it, I don't like sleeping on the road because I don't have the ability to use my chili pad. Bunch of former colleagues back at Towson got it. My stepmother got it. Check it out in the link down below.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first questions I ask athletes in maybe the first or second session or even a team is that very question, like, when you play at your best, do you like to be super amped up and feel the adrenaline going and all of that? Or do you like to be more calm, cool, and collected? Right? Okay, let's put that on a number scale, right? Are you more of like a 4 out of 10 with that, heart rate and energy being a little lower versus are you an 8 out of 10 and you're jumping off the walls? And I think that's the first, like I was an 8 out of 10. I loved headphones in going, but the minute I stepped onto the field, you lock in, right? And so I think sometimes like we are the difference between nerves and excitement, or I'm sorry, nervousness and excitement is our perception because it's the same energy or activation that's happening in our body, right? Like the same, like our heart rate is higher when we're excited
Yeah,
and when we have feelings of performance anxiety, right?
yeah.
It's just the way that we perceive it. Do I perceive this situation as a threat or do I perceive this situation as a challenge and opportunity? So with I think first is understanding that like, oh, it's the way that I'm looking at it, right? And then if we're really amped up and we don't like to be there, we know that's not good for my performance. Okay, let's take a couple physical deep breaths to lower my heart rate and my physiology that's happening inside my body, right? Because when I bring my heart rate down, I'm bringing my energy down to more of an equilibrium, right? I'm bringing it back to neutral. Athletes might like to be at neutral, right? Versus if I need to get a little bit more amped up, let's take a couple shallow deep breaths to increase my heart rate. I'm physically increasing my energy. And now I can attach some powerful self-talk to say, let's go, get amped up. Or on the reverse side, hey, you got this. Take a deep breath. I trust myself because, right? So I always find a balance of the physiology, right? So physically bringing our heart rate down with our breath and breath work and attaching that with some sort of powerful self-talk or effective self-talk that can also help you get there. So that's a balance of that shows how integrated the mind body connection is and how one influences the other.
Hearing you talk about the music reminded me of listening to Dr. Eric Corum back in the day when he was at Kentucky, and he was trying to talk to the athletes about not always walking around all day having music, listening in just normal training in the off season, in season, But then I then wanted to think like, okay, what also about on game day where you're listening to music like 4 or 5 hours out from the game? You just got to be drained because you're just in that fight or flight for way too long.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that might, for an athlete who might have a little bit higher of performance anxiety, or they find themselves thinking about the game too early. Yeah, you're right. We're putting mental energy into something that isn't effective, right? And so that's where every athlete's different in the way that they prepare. And it's coming up with like, okay, well, if you're listening to music 4 hours ahead of time, and that's dialing you into the game, and by the game time you're mentally fatigued,
Yes.
then that pre-game routine is not helpful for you. Versus if it's, hey, I'm just listening to music because I love listening to music and it's distracting me from the game, right? That like when I get to the locker room, that's when I dial in and start to focus. Okay, right? So I think it's different for every athlete. And that's where, a lot of questions and where we build a lot of self awareness around, how are you feeling right before the game? Okay, what's your process leading up to that? And how do we make adjustments so you are at your best or close to your best as possible when game time comes?
And that also led me to think about like I mean, just trying to get them to understand like what is the, I'm trying to give really good practical advice for our coaches. Like, okay, a lot of times athletes play games at night. Like, how can you help amp them down? What are during a long process where they're excited for it? And it's like, man, how can we help these coaches amp up, amp down when they've got all this extra time? Is the answer doing a walkthrough? Is it, getting like, or is it truly just so individualized? Like, hey, this is why you need to have, TG Performance working with you and helping you out. And that's exactly why
Mhm.
IMG did it, right? Like, I mean, that's the answer, folks. And she's going to give you a little bit of the answers. But if you really want to know, hire her, like, honestly. But yeah,
Yeah, thanks for that. We all need coaches in our life, whether that's strength coaches, mental performance coaches, business coaches, right? We need that support and mentorship around us. And I echo that. I think that's super important. And like I'll give you a little, disclosure just about my personal pregame process is in college. I mean, I love listening to music, but I was very intentional about when I started that process. And I knew I had to listen to a certain song. Like I always had to listen to this one song. It was Heart of a Champion by Nelly, hyped up, whether that was right before I walked down to the field or right before I got off the bus at an away trip. And I think what was important to remember is it took me a while to figure this out is you have to be flexible in your pregame routines. And if you don't have enough time, what's the minimal time you need to know that you are prepped and ready? So that's the first thing. I think it's also important to recognize, do you need alone time? And when is it time to get hype with your team? Right? Because your team might like to listen to music and get hyped up, but you might need a couple minutes of quiet or just to be mindful and take a couple breaths. Right. So again, I think that's, how can coaches help athletes do that? Will recognize the time that you have and prepare athletes like, hey, we have a half hour of time between when we get off the bus to the time that we step out onto the field, right? We only have a half hour, or we have an hour, or this is when we need to start warm up. So then athletes can work backwards to figure out, okay, if I know that I get really anxious at 15 minutes before, then this is when I need to put in my mindfulness routine, right? Or my imagery routine or whatever I need in that moment. Or if I know that I get really sleepy on away trips, okay, then I'm going to turn my music on 15 minutes before we get to the location so I can start getting amped up. And I think that when coaches communicate some of that plan as much as what's in your control, right? You can't always control a bus being late or traffic
yeah.
or any of that, but what's within my control that I can focus on to help me be the best that I can be.
Yeah, no, I feel that. And I guess my next question building off of that is how do you handle coaches or people nowadays that'll say like, "Oh, we've coddled these athletes and things are too easy for them." Like that's got to be something based off your facial expression. That's got to be something that you deal with a lot.
All the time. These athletes,
They're soft. This
they're
generation's
soft. They don't
soft.
have any grit. And I mean, I can speak to that from a coaching perspective and a mental performance perspective. And they're not wrong, but they're also not right either. It's just a different athlete. And I think I think social media has a big part in all of that with instant gratification, and I can get things right away, and comparison and seeing highlights of other people, and it's not reality. I think a lot of that external stimulation takes away from internal drive. And I'll say that's my personal opinion. Um, so with the, teaching of grit and aggression, or not even aggression, but being able to attack and take the first step and not be hesitant, right? It's this, we have to break down the system of this perfectionistic mindsets of some high performers. And so, I might ramble here a bit because I think there's so much to go that goes on with this, and it can be really, really deep rooted. But I think the language behind that is we can do hard things. You can do hard things as an athlete. You actually have 40%, and you might be able to speak to this a little bit more than I can. You have 40% more energy than what you think you do. So if you think about yourself doing sprints and you're like, whoa, I don't know if I can make it, you actually have 40% more energy to put out there in your bucket, right? But your mind is the one who's stopping you because it's trying to protect you. It's trying to keep you safe and in this comfort zone, right? And not experience pain or discomfort. But our bodies can handle that, right? And that is the threshold that we need to get over to not only challenge our limits, but break them so then we create new limits to go after. That is how we increase not only our physical performance, but also our mental toughness, right? We're challenging our limits and sometimes fail. Like we have to fail, right? Like just like your physical muscles have to fail to get stronger, our brain does too, right? As long as we have the proper recovery. But you can do hard things. And I think that is like the language that we have to pump into these athletes is what is the hard thing and challenging that. And it's about taking risks. It's about being uncomfortable. It's about, going back to my risk comment, it's about taking the risk or having fear and doing the thing anyway. I think it's what comes down to. And there's this quote that I read that I've been using a lot recently, that fear always precedes courageous action.
Ooh, I like
Like
that.
we always will experience some sort of fear or anxiety or can I do this before we do something courageous or something hard or something that scares us. And that feeling means that we care. And it means that like actually we can do it despite the outcome. And we have to do it to see what we're capable of. And that really sticks with me when I think about this generation of athlete is we have to be okay to fail and we have to be okay to perform despite the fear.
Well, that made me think of, yeah, I think it was a TED talk that I listened to one time where it's like, it actually, anxious thoughts or whatever makes you actually realize, wait a minute, no, like you said, I care. But if you just frame it differently, like, no, that's just my body preparing for the difficult thing that I'm going to do. Oh, okay. Like, that's my body getting me ready to do what I have to do. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's just, what is it? They think they said that it's just reframing the situation.
Yes, right. Reframing our perception of it or our perspective. It's reframing the thought to something that works for us, right? I say all the time, like we have to make our brain work. We have to train our brain to work for us, not against us, because it will always work against us if we allow it to.
100%, and like that's where you have to you have to help reframe and reposition these thoughts for athletes, kids, because I mean, coaches, I'm sure coaches out there like, listen, y'all act tough. Like when you interviewed for that job, you were probably a little bit anxious.
Exactly. And it's okay to name it. Like, name the fear, name the nerves, put it out there because when it's out there, one, you find that you're not alone. And there's a lot of people in the same boat as you, right? So you're all in it together. That not only increases, like that also increases team cohesion, right? And your team dynamic, but then it's out there, right? And now I can see it and I can be like, I see you fear, I see you nerves, and I'm going to put you in the passenger seat and now I'm going to drive you because I'm going to reframe my thought or how I think about this experience.
But like you said, I see you. Yeah, you don't. You have to, like you said, you have to talk about it, and then you have to find ways to talk about it with your athletes and your sport coaches to then be able to empower them to then and go and do the thing. Because yes, like you put all that time, you take whether it's football or the different sports. Football, I was just going to say because I worked with it the most, but there's fewer opportunities. Yeah, it might be a little bit of fearful to think like, oh, I did all this work. Now what's going to happen? People are going to watch me. People are going to judge. But it's just like that's our job is to then be like, no, listen, put that out, ignore all that other noise, and go and do that great thing. Like, I love what you said here, fear before courageous activity, because it
Mm-hmm.
is just so true. And like the devil wants us to believe that, like, oh, you can't do it. And it's like, no, you really can. Like, just stop with that. Like, just stop.
Yes, exactly. And that's, back in evolutionary times like that, we're trained, our brain is trained for survival mode
Yeah,
to
that's all I want.
right? Like
Homeostasis. Stay alive.
exactly. Like stay
Homeostasis.
alive. And we have a decision-making part of our brain that decides what is actually a threat and dangerous versus what am I perceiving as a threat and dangerous. And that's the power of human beings. That's the power that you have internally to make that decision and that choice. Everything's a choice. We can't control what happens to us,
No.
and but we absolutely can choose our response.
I mean, that's just so unbelievably true. Like that's where another thing that I remember is like, look, it's not the thing that happened, it's the time between the action that happened and then your response. Like nothing happens is inherently good or inherently bad. It's our response to the situation and how we can actually then control that and tell ourselves that and reframe because like you said, society, your friends, whatever it is that are
Hmm.
outside influencing you that aren't on your team, they're going to tell you the things that like you got to doubt your doubts and believe your beliefs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And it's about, challenging our doubts and making our beliefs stronger, right? Like we make our weaknesses better, but we also continue to make our strengths stronger.
With respect, obviously respecting the privacy of the people that you work with, but like what has been one of the most rewarding experiences for you working with an athlete in the last 10 years where they've been like, listen, I couldn't do X, now I'm doing X and I'm thriving in it Y way.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, this is what lights me up doing the work, especially when I work with an athlete over a long period of time where sometimes you're like, am I making a difference? Like I start to doubt my own
Am I
ability,
doing
right? Like, am I
anything
doing it
properly?
right? And every athlete's different and their process is different. And I'll give you a more recent example. I'm working with a very high level Division 1 athlete who had a serious injury. And so we're working through that whole process right now. And the other day, she just had this huge breakthrough of acceptance and it allows the ability to do the work that we've been doing in a very different way. And what I mean by that is you have to meet athletes where they're at, but the minute the light bulb goes off and you see that change, it's like, oh, okay, now we can really go to work and build this whole other skill set to help you be not only the athlete that you were, but a better, stronger, more consistent, different, dynamic athlete. And I think that's really powerful, especially with working with such high performers. Is they're used to that, and also like it's almost like their biggest strength and weakness at the same time. Because with someone who's injured, they can't do the things they once did. And so that has been a really rewarding moment for me, just in terms of seeing this athlete and her progress and the breakthrough that she's made in her own way. Um, so I think it's that aspect, and then it's really having the athletes come back and being like, oh my gosh, I was able to recover from that mistake in the moment and I didn't even think about it. Or I got back out on the field and I just was in the zone and I was flowing, or I used our pre-game preparation and it was the best that I've ever played. And what's important in those moments, it's like, great, now how do we make that consistent? Right?
You
And
sound like a
so,
strength coach though, because it's like,
yes,
listen, hey, you did the movement properly. I've been trying to teach it to you that way. You finally understand what we're looking for. Now you got to do it all the time.
yeah, and that was more recent in one of my athletes I've been working with since they were a sophomore in high school and now they're a senior in college. And the progress, like, right, we worked a lot together up front, right? That loading, and then it was just like season specific. We would have check-ins, and again, it was seeing that progress and the maturity with the mental game of building their own self awareness of what makes them tick, what they need. We worked on these strategies, but these are the ones that really connected with me. And having those check ins of really like towards the end of their athletic career, it was them doing the talking. It wasn't me. It was them sharing with me their process and their self-awareness, and me just kind of reaffirming or asking a question of, well, why do you think that? Right? And them coming up with their own answers and their own solutions. That's when I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Like, they're doing the work and they're continue to doing the work. And I think that's a big part of, our job as mental performance coaches, is when we see athletes kind of take the reins and become their own coaches. Like, that's really rewarding. And that's what really fires me up.
Looking to expand your education further, but you don't want to pay the massive fees of going back to school? At Strength Coach Network, we have two long form education courses that both cost less than one course taught to you by an online school. If you click down below to learn more about Fundamentals 1 or Fundamentals 2, you will be able to sign up for our education course that has over 20 hours of educational content brought to you by some of the biggest names in the field: Dr. Brian Mann, Zach Daycant, Jeff Moyer, Terrence Kennel, and many more inside of this course, all for less than the price of one course at a college university. Are you expanding and need more equipment inside your current room? Or are you building a new weight room and you need to get some equipment? You need to look no further than Powerlift. I had Powerlift equipment when I was at Harvard, Iowa, and at the University of Maryland. I'm currently utilizing their stuff right now. I'm telling you, Powerlift strong, Powerlift made here in America, here in the great state of Iowa, made, manufactured. You have the ability for customization, whether it's on the bench, whether it's on the upholstery, whether it's on the bumpers, across the rack. There are countless options, making sure it's designed to your specific brand. It's Powerlift made, it's Powerlift strong, it's not cheap like all the other competitors, and the people inside of Powerlift are people that you want to be with. Check them out in the link down below. Hawkeye Dynamic is the best option if you're trying to get any force plate data or if you're trying to collect any isometric mid-thigh pulls. Not only can you do isometric mid-thigh pulls for the lower body, but I call it an isometric mid-thigh pull for your upper body, where you're able to do an isometric push-up into something where your back is pushing into a bar and your hands are on the force plate. I utilized Hawkins force plates and Hawkins software when I was at Towson. Still utilize it now when I'm at Goldfinch. If you're using the other competitors, I don't know what you're doing. Hawkins customer service is second to none. Hawkins software and their hardware, again, second to none. Check them out in the link down below. How about on the flip side then? What would you say was one of the most difficult situations and difficult times where, because I know I've had my times where I'm like, man, I didn't like, A, I didn't connect with this athlete. B,
Mm-hmm.
did my programming even work? Like, everybody got hurt or nobody got as fat. Like, so there's been times in my personal career, and I know there's strength coaches out there, whether they're going to admit it or not. What has been one of those times? And then what did you then learn from it? And how would you then apply that to coaches now?
Yeah, great question. And actually, this is something that I went through also very recently. Is I had another pretty high performing, working with a high performing athlete um, over the past year or so, and check-ins were sporadic, our sessions were sporadic, maybe once a month or every 2 months, and I received feedback that we weren't connecting well, and they wanted somebody with more focus on what this athlete was either going through or experiencing, or in the sport or level that they were at. And my first reaction was like a blow to my ego, right? Like, how, I'm not good enough, right? And so, one, I think it's important to have your support system around you to rely on. I think that's huge. Second, it's taking the message out of the emotion. And
Mm.
it's what they didn't connect with me. That's what they were getting from my approach wasn't connecting, and that's okay. Right? The message is they need different help and different support. And so I'm taking that message and I'm going to help them find the support that they need. And that's what I did. Right? So, yes, initially, is it sad, frustrating, a little angry, whatever? But it's taking the message out of the emotion and realizing you aren't going to connect with everybody and your approach is different than somebody else's. Just think about coaches too. Like, I connect differently with some of my athletes than my assistant coaches do. And that's okay. And that's where it comes back to, you don't always have to be the one that gives the message. Um, and that has been a really great lesson that I've learned over the past, more so over the past couple of years recently, which is why I think it was, I don't want to say easier for me to recover from that moment. But to kind of take my own emotion out of it and stay objective in that situation.
How do you stay objective in the situation and take the message out of the emotion when working with injured athletes that might be
Mm,
overly, like that's a really difficult situation, especially if it's a catastrophic injury where they've lost a significant amount of time.
hmm
Again, respecting any person's privacy just from a 10,000-foot view. And how does that situation go?
Sure. I think that process is a little different because especially working with injured athletes, you have to meet them with where they're at and you have to address the emotion because that's a big part of it. And it's okay to experience those emotions, right?
Yes.
So it's it's helping them experience the emotion and letting it go and what's
Hmm.
helpful for them and what's hurtful for them,
That's good. That'll
right? And
preach. That'll preach.
and then this is kind of where the art comes in, right? It's uh emotions are so powerful and they teach us so much and they tell us so much, but they're also only chemical reactions that are happening inside of our body. They are
Mm.
electrically charged pathways that are occurring in our body and they only last 90 seconds. And so the science behind it says we only experience emotion up to 90 seconds. That's what the research tells us. So any other time that we're spending in that emotion
We've
is
chosen
what
to.
we've chosen to do
I
that.
feel like I remember reading that somewhere too, where I was like, "Son of a gun," because boy, I can fester on something. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
after I read that, I was like, "All right, Justin, experience the emotion, be happy." I had something really good happen about a month ago, or no, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was like, I was pumped up. But then after like 3 minutes, I was like, "All right, that's like I felt the emotion, I moved on." But you're right, like, boy, we strength coaches, we can ruminate on things.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. So can us mental performance coaches. So can athletes. So can coaches, right?
People, we're human,
It's
right? We're
human
human.
nature.
Yep,
We're
you're
human.
right.
And so it's navigating that process with an athlete and not um, minimizing it either, right? Like their reality is their reality in that moment. Um, and you can also be experiencing anger and also have a really good success story in that moment, like have a milestone in your progress, right? So like those emotions can live simultaneously. And I've seen when I've talked about that with injured athletes, that's like, oh, I can be angry and happy. Like I can be angry with the situation but happy with my progress. Right? So it's like kind of experiencing emotion and letting it go. And a lot easier said than done, right? But it's working through that process and we talk a lot about with injuries, right? It's the stages of grief, right? And you're in all of that. It doesn't happen linear, right? It's we ebb and throw through this process. And once we have a few times of acceptance, like I accept the reality of my situation, that's when the true work gets done. And when we can really start to be objective about the emotions that we're experiencing.
Ooh. objective. That's another word that, again, because we're human beings, it's difficult. Like you can get so caught up in that cascade of emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, have there been certain words or phrases that you'll work with athletes and be like, hey, use this to kind of stop that kind of thought in its tracks, or some kind of practical techniques like that?
Mm. Yeah, so the word stop is a great one.
Oh, okay,
Right?
really?
Like just like,
Like,
oh,
just
okay,
stop.
stop that thought, right? How do I reframe that to a helpful one? Um, an approach that I use is this triple A approach. And I think I first read this like with Michael Jordan, who used this way back when, but it's acknowledge, accept, take action. So either acknowledge the thought or the reality, accept it, right? I can't control the thought that comes into my head, right? But I choose my response, or I choose how to I reframe it, or I choose what's helpful. So acknowledge, accept it, then act, right? What's my response? How am I reframing this? Do I just need to take a deep breath and reset and walk away from the moment? Right? So I can get back to this neutral way of thinking or this neutral emotion. It's really hard
Mm.
to go from a negative state to a positive state. So how do I get back to neutral? How do I get back to that homeostasis, right? And that might just be that's acceptance of where I'm at in the moment.
Huh. One of the questions that I have to, kind of start to wrap this up for you is, where do you see the field of mental performance within athletics going over the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years? Because so right now it is, 2024. I feel like it was 2016 when I was at Iowa and we got Headspace logins for players if they wanted them, right? And some did, some didn't. And I've seen and you hear, and things are continuing to evolve, and IMG continues to seem to be on the forefront of it. Where do you see it going? Where does there still need to be lacking from, us people that work in athletics? Like, where is this going to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's I don't want to say that's still unknown, but it's still there's so many opportunities for where this field can go. And I think
Yeah.
what's been helpful is the addition to mental health support in NCAA athletics, which has helped the field of mental performance grow because we're also represented in that as well. And I think the conversations that are happening is what's the difference between mental health and mental toughness,
Ooh.
right? And so mental health is when, we need to go clinical, see a licensed professional counselor, a licensed therapist, versus mental toughness and mental performance, right? Is how do I take my performance to the next level? Or, hey, had this setback, I'm dealing with some distractions or some stressors in my sport. How do I overcome them? That's mental performance, that's mental toughness. And so that is where I think the field is really trying to not only separate, but thrive and also collaborate
Mm.
with all the different components that go into an athlete's wellness. And I think the more that conversation happens, where it's collaboration, is both fields are going to thrive. And so the field of mental performance, I mean, every major baseball team has a mental performance coach on staff. I think that's huge. NBA is following suit. Um, we're starting to see it more at the high school level, which is awesome. And so I think the need is out there and the conversations are happening. I think IMG is doing a tremendous job of, identifying how to help athletes on a national level and really normalizing that it's okay to go and get a mental performance coach to help your mental game get stronger,
Yeah.
right? Like that is what we're here to do, to help create consistency in your performance from the mental side of sport. So I think the sky's the limit with how we are effective in the field, all the way from the youth level all the way up to the professional level. And I think the more conversations that happen around not only the difference between mental health and mental performance, but how they influence and how they collaborate together for the betterment of the athlete, the athletic program, the athletic experience.
how do we do that without just doing a check of the box is going to be the question a lot of strength coaches have, because it's like, oh, I sat in this seminar. Like they feel like some of this could be a check of the
Mm-hmm.
box versus doing right by the athletes, which that right there can tick off a lot of people that care about athletes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that does happen somewhere. I mean, that does happen in many places. Oh, we have this, great, I can check the box. When in reality, it's not the support that the program needs or the athlete needs.
And it does a
Um,
disservice to the practitioner that's asked to work with, okay, like a high school has it. All right, cool. You have 2,000 athletes. Go fix them.
right,
And it's like,
exactly,
what?
right. Yes.
How?
So, right, we need to invest in hiring more coaches, right? Like we need to invest that budget into hiring more professionals. Whether that, I mean, and there, I mean, this is, how I operate, right? But I'm a contractor for certain things, right? And so it doesn't have to be a full-time employee, but how do we get these athletes more touch points with all of the local mental performance coaches or sports psych professionals surrounding a college or a club team, or right? Like what are we actually investing in? I think that is a conversation. Um, and really hiring the right and qualified people to do so, with the backgrounds. And I think that's just an ongoing conversation of how programs are organized. With a sports performance model, that's not only strength and conditioning, that's nutrition, that's some athletic performance, that's mental performance, and that's also mental health. And I think that's like when we see those five pillars, we know a program is, trying to do it right and taking the necessary steps. And so what are the means that organizations have to do that, and what are they investing in? And I think that comes a lot around the culture of the program. And again, I think that's a bigger conversation. But I think the more conversations we have at that, and the more available mental performance coaches are to do so, then we're going to thrive and get to where we need to be.
And where we need to be ultimately is helping athletes, perform better and teams win. And like, that's the end goal, everybody. We're trying to support, like, we are the support structures to helping your team do the sport and the thing that they want to do. And we're just here to help. Like, that's what I feel like can be the frustrating part for us and the
Yes.
support staff. Like, we're not trying to
Yep.
take away from, we're not trying to detract. We're
Right.
trying to help you do your thing so you can get the end result that you want, coach.
Right. And that's a balance of staying in your lane and also collaborating. And again,
Mm.
that's just more conversations, m- more ability to be vulnerable and open, and really checking your ego at the door, because it's not about you. It's about the athlete. It's about the athletic experience. It's about the program.
That's a mic drop moment. That's a great spot to end this conversation. Theresa, where can people learn more about you, follow you, and be able to just ask questions and inquire from you?
Yes. So, TG Performance Mindset is my Instagram handle. TGperformancemindset.com is my website. You can find me on the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, their website. That is my certification and the hosting arm of, the mental performance profession. But yes, those, Instagram, I'm all over. Follow my website, shoot me an email. I'm here to help.
Thank you very much for joining us. You have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you so much. You too.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.